This podcast contains explicit language.
This is the first episode of Two Fat Guys Talk Games. And today's topic, game controllers. Game controllers, what up?
Well, what was your first game controller?
Atari 2600, the joystick and the button, top left corner.
So your basic Atari controller.
Basic Atari controller. I did not have nor know about the Sega Genesis controller plugging into it at the time.
Well, of course, because it wasn't around.
First video game I played this on was Berserk. It was in the arcades. It was the game where the robot said, destroy all humanoids, capture all humanoids.
Okay.
On the Atari, it didn't have that. But it had...
Unless you had the add-on.
Not unless you had the add-on. But it did have the most scarring thing about my childhood. That's when you touch the wall, you got electrocuted. There's this very distinctive electronic Atari synth noise. And it scared me shitless. I think I peed a little bit once hearing this fucking noise.
Let's see. First controller for me would be the specialty Atari Pong joystick, where you actually move the... It was one of the first digital pad wheels on a controller.
So for like Arkanoid and whatnot.
Arkanoid, except in those days, you couldn't get it on the actual Atari cartridges. It was the Supercharger. Which was tapes that you played into the audio tunes.
I had a game that was on tapes, but I never had the tape deck. It was
any tape deck would run.
It was the Berenstain Bears game, and it came with multiple tapes and a cartridge, which did nothing by itself except have a background mocking me.
Yep.
Yes. So Atari 2600. Did you ever play F-14 Tomcat on the Atari 2600?
Yes.
Yes.
As well as a much better version of the Commodore. Which, right there.
I never had a Commodore.
Commodore used the exact same Atari joystick.
The Commodore had the keypad, right?
Well, the Commodore, no.
I never had a Commodore.
Commodore, and even that was technically a controller. The Commodore was basically a keyboard.
The reason I bring
the entire system was based in your keyboard. It plugged into the disk drive, and then you plug the controller, one or two, into the keyboard, and then that outputs into the...
So when we see the angry video game nerd doing the thing on his Commodore, that's the entirety of the system.
That's the entirety of the system.
The monitor is not a part of it? I thought the monitor was a part of it.
Nope, that was Mac.
That was okay.
Mac had it all built in, but the Commodore was the keyboard.
Okay.
But no, the same controller, any of those Atari controllers would work vice versa, back and forth. Even in this case, the Sega Genesis controller could work on the Commodore.
Now, I want to bring up that 14 Tomcat again, because on the Commodore...
Are we talking about shitty games?
It was shitty, but it had something interesting. On the Commodore, you had to use various keypad options in addition to the joystick, right? Mm-hmm. On the Atari, you had to use the switches on the console. So...
That's
stupid. It was cool, though, because it was kind of like you were in a cockpit. Like, the reset switch, you would have to hold it to reset. If you just tapped it, it set your landing gear or some other aspect of your plane. And there was a couple of toggle switches on the thing. I think I have an Atari at home. I'm serious, I have it. I recently found my Genesis. I'm gonna try to sell it, because I haven't played it forever. I don't even know if it works. But I have an Atari at home, and there's a toggle switch. And that was part of the game. You had to toggle it to set, like, your landing gear or some other aspect of your ailerons or some shit.
Good way for it to use the actual system itself as the controller.
At the time, I thought that was dope as shit. I thought that was the coolest shit in the world, that I was like in a cockpit, basically.
Well, imagination was... what am I saying? Imagination was much better back then, much more well used. But, I mean, for controllers, we were pretty limited back in those days. I mean, having a 2-button controller would have mattered, because on those old systems, one button was one button. 2 buttons did the exact same thing.
If the game
unless it was turbo.
If the game even used buttons.
There's that too.
Mm-hmm. So Steel Battalion.
Oh wow, we're jumping really into more modern.
Had a controller with 8 bazillion buttons.
Yeah, but
the Atari had 1 button. What up?
Well, Steel Battalion was a specialty thing, though. I mean, ultimately, Steel Battalion, the control itself, was for those who wanted the most realistic style of control.
Realistic with finger quotes.
Yeah. Especially seeing as there was no force feedback, as far as I remember.
There was an eject button, and if you didn't eject in time, the save file would be destroyed.
Okay, didn't know about that.
Yeah, you have to eject or you lose your campaign save.
But the actual controller itself, I thought it was an actual interesting test, because it gave you it was made for one game ultimately, and in the end, I won't say it was successful. I mean, let's face it, those controllers now on eBay are expensive as all heck.
The new one is using the Kinect.
Yeah, speaking of controllers, I don't like using.
You and Kinect, me and the Wii.
Well, any big guy or girl using the Kinect has problems.
Depends. What if the Steel Battalion lets you mostly? What if it uses Kinect mostly just to tap on screen buttons and you don't gotta move a lot?
I still think, at least until we get the next version of the Kinect, it would be flawed. Because, let's face it, when you're talking a cockpit-style game, let's say a flight simulator or even a mech control sort of thing, you need precise controls. When you go to press the eject button or whatever else.
Which was under a little flat on the controller, by the way.
On the original, okay, that makes sense, but when you need to do precise things, you need it to respond right now. Which is why controllers like the Microsoft Sidewinder and those sort of controllers were made, because we wanted more from force feedback, we wanted, swivel to go with Mech Warrior. I mean, those games were fashioned around game mindsets more than just, it wasn't specific to Mech Warrior or this or that, but it was multi-purpose, but you still sense that it was made for a certain genre.
What was the first controller you used in X-Wing?
Keyboard and mouse.
Keyboard and mouse? What about TIE Fighter? Had you evolved
Same
to
thing.
a joystick? I
didn't evolve to an actual flight stick until the days of MechWarrior.
I actually had a Gravis joystick specifically for TIE Fighter. It never centered quite right, and I only used it for that one game. It didn't have Z-axis.
Are you talking the Gravis controllers like the PlayStation style, or an actual
joystick? A flight stick, like with a trigger button and a thumb button
and bottom
and
buttons,
some weird dial thing on the top.
Oh, that was usually for doing like a HUD.
Yes. Now, this is the first podcast-ish thing I'm trying to do here. Can I just blow my nose right now? Because I really gotta blow my damn nose.
Go ahead.
Alright. Just to gross out our one listener. I assume one because I'll listen to it and you won't.
Probably.
If I were to play TIE Fighter now, I would just use my 360 pad.
I don't know.
It's analog. It's got enough buttons. And you'd have to use the keyboard anyway because there were tons of controls in that game.
I always thought for flight simulators that you got more of a feel for it by using an actual flight stick. On the other hand, Mech Warrior was my game, so I had the Sidewinder joystick, and Sidewinder 3D was my first one, with force feedback. But the problem was they hadn't made the gyros in those yet, the hydraulic systems, strong enough yet.
Mm-hmm.
Still a plastic core, so you had to be gentle with it, but it also didn't.
Are you saying these sticks use hydraulics?
Sort of
I thought they used just a spinning gear, because when I tried to perform surgery on my PlayStation 2 sticks and combine the colors, different. It was a little spinning thing on the inside.
In that way, that was a rumble feature. We're talking actual force feedback.
Oh,
so
if you took a shot from the left, starboard, or port, whatever,
well,
it would kind of move you to the right.
A little bit. It was more for like if you got hit, or as you were moving, boom, boom, left, right, and on the Sidewinder 3D, I was playing at the time Mercenaries or even MechWarrior 3, and I could overpower it, so I could hold that thing straight. I upgraded to a Logitech, and all of a sudden the control was kicking the living shit out of me because it was a hydraulic in there with a steel shaft, so it could.
And it was actually hydraulic?
It was a type of hydraulic.
Because here's the thing, my PC gaming that's only been a recent thing for me. You were the one who did most of that. I only played Doom and TIE Fighter. Those were my games on PC, right?
Yep.
And the occasional other game. But you were big into that, so I don't know about any of these sticks. There were hydraulic sticks?
Yeah. Well,
wow.
When you're referencing, and I guess this is still on topic, because we're still talking controllers, but all of our rumbles / force feedback that we've got in our controllers today, they are small and large vibration sensors. So it still gives you a little bit of that sense, but if you have cracked open a PS2 controller, there's one large one and one small one.
Yeah.
And that was what gave you the whole force feedback left and right. Whereas with these guys, these were actual, it had to force you. So you couldn't do a spinner. It had to be an actual hydraulic system going back and forth.
Kind of like that arm wrestling game in the arcade.
Yes. But way more complex.
So we kind of veered off gamepads into joysticks here. That was more my fault. But yeah, it's controllers. It's on topic. I was going to bring it back by saying, if you could have played Star Fox on a flight stick, would you have?
No.
If you had, would up have been down? Would it be flight controls, or would up be up? Because on a stick...
keep in mind, back is up.
Back is up, forward is down. On a
I
stick...
would still keep that going, because I find when you have an actual flight stick in your hand, that feels natural. Because if you pushed up, or forward rather, and you went up, that feels really weird.
I feel the same way, but only on a dedicated flight stick. If I was playing on a pad, even if I was using a 360 controller's analog nub, I would still want up to be up. On a proper stick, like if I went out and bought a flight stick, I would want up to be down and back to be up, just like a normal plane.
So, controller schemes. Camera controls.
Oh.
Forward down or forward up.
Almost every game with camera controls involves either the second analog stick, or on the N64 it was the yellow buttons.
Please, let's leave out one of the worst controllers.
It counts, and those buttons were dedicated to camera, basically.
I know.
And they weren't bad buttons. The irony is, if they were the same size as A and B, they would have been the perfect fighting game buttons if you played those on a pad. Well, you do. I don't. I like a stick. But back to this. For camera controls, up has to be up. And left has to be left. Because games from Japan, like Dynasty Warriors Gundam, which I played to death, did it the other way. Left moved you right, the camera.
Yes.
It was inverse. And you couldn't change that until, like, the third game in the series. And it drove me nuts, because then I would play a game where it wasn't like that, and it threw me right the fuck off.
Only reason I ask is I've recently gotten Jak and Daxter High Def, and they actually finally gave me the camera control option for Jak 1, which allowed me to do left is left, right is right. But up is down, down is up. If you inverse them, when you go into trigger mode to do shooting for some of the mini stuff, it inverses. So it messes you completely up every which way.
They gotta give you the individuals for
Yes.
that. So anywho, Star Fox you would still play on a Super Nintendo pad.
I would still play on a Super Nintendo pad. Now, worst gaming controller.
Worst gaming controller. See, that's tough, because objectively, a lot of people remember the NES and Super Nintendo controllers fondly. They weren't really that good. However, none of them touches the horrendous. And a lot of people disagree with me about this. In fact, Microsoft based their Xbox controller design on this controller. The Dreamcast controller. Horrible controller. Hate it. I could still pull off 720s to do Zangief spinning pile driver supers in like the fighting games it had. But good lord, the pad was it was rigid cross. It wasn't a soft cross with good diagonals like on the good Nintendo controllers.
I've played it.
It's this brick, this raised cross brick with no good diagonals.
Yeah.
The analog stick, it was convex and it didn't grip your thumb. The buttons were poor quality. The whole thing felt flimsy. I did not like that controller.
Now, I didn't own a Dreamcast, so I did play yours a little bit. So I know a little bit about what you're saying, but I've got to go with Thumb Bleeder.
Thumb Bleeder. What is Thumb Bleeder?
The N64 controller.
N64 one has a lot of problems.
I never owned an N64.
Neither did I. I borrowed Shane's for a little while. Shane's a friend of mine. I don't know if he wants his name mentioned in this. He'll be fine. We'll bleep out his name and refer to him as...
We'll put an emphasis of shame.
He was a big X-Files fan, so Deep Throat, that'll be his name, Deep Throat.
But no, I never owned it, but every time I used that controller, it was just wrong. It was big, so it had the largeness of an original Xbox controller with the... I'll give them credit. I mean, the controller actually would allow for different schemes for different games, so you held it differently. But my God, how the buttons and the control actually bit into your thumb.
I thought the N64 controller was really good, ironically, for first-person shooters. Doom 64, which was an original episode, which you have a hard time finding WAD files of for the PC, controlled really well by using the yellow keys to move and strafe, and the stick for the camera, and then the Z trigger on your left, of all things, for the gun. But I see what you're saying. That controller was an experiment. It's like, you have 2 hands, 3 prongs, each game uses 2 of the 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, and why wouldn't you design this controller to use every part of it if I wanted? And that came later.
Yeah. I mean, it was a testament to the time, but the only thing worse... Well, no, that was my worst controller, I believe.
What about the Jaguar controller? I've never, ever even held one. But I gotta tell you something. That thing looked horrible. That looked like a thumb bleeder. I couldn't even imagine playing Tempest on that thing.
And yet, it was natural.
Really?
I've actually held one, I played with it, and it was not as bad. In fact, after a while, it became just as natural as playing with one of the traditional Gravis controllers.
Huh.
Which, early PC controls.
Early PC Gravis.
Sound Blaster cards.
Sound Blaster cards with game ports.
Game ports.
And a Gravis controller.
Gravis controller where you could actually use up to the 6 buttons it had on it, unless you daisy-chained it for games like hockey, in which case you were limited to 2 buttons, in which case you might as well not play because you'd need at least 3. Oh, brilliant.
Daisy-chaining controllers. Oh my lord. I'm okay with cables. I'm actually quite okay with cables. My arcade stick has a cable, and I don't think I'd want a wireless, although wireless controls are really responsive this day and age. For an arcade stick, I wouldn't want one. But daisy chaining, I don't know, I'd still feel uncomfortable knowing if there's more than one cable and it's leading to someone else's controller, that seems so alien to me.
Alien, but was the only way to play even 2-player games unless you had the money to have the Sound Blaster and a dedicated game card.
Oh god, with 2 ports.
In which case, you had a lot of money at the time, or a lot of time trying to track these guys down.
Hey, didn't a dedicated game card actually take up the Sound Blaster game port so that you couldn't have 3 controllers? It was still only 2?
Yep.
Oh.
You could only ever do 2.
Oh.
I mean, things changed and it got better. I mean, USB was where PC gaming broke out into as many as you wanted the game to do.
Which, to some extent, the consoles kind of supported. They need to support them more, though. I didn't like that Final Fantasy VII sequel shooter with Vincent. What was it called? Dirge of Cerberus?
Yeah.
But good on them for having keyboard and mouse support. Why the fuck didn't Metroid Prime on Wii? Metroid Prime 3 and Trilogy have that. Hell, even if it let me use a GameCube controller so I don't have to use that shitty Wii remote. It's a Wii remote.
I know.
Nintendo doesn't like the term Wiimote.
Nintendo, for the terms of our conversations, could bite it.
Yeah, I'm not
a... I don't mind the Wiimote, but it has to be made for the game. You and me disagree about the latest Zelda on that.
My latest...
I think you're being an idiot on it, but...
Do you think... what do you think of the original NES controller?
By today's standards?
By today's standards and by the time.
Well, seeing as I got a mock-up over here for the PC, it's hard to handle. I mean, we've gotten used to having very contoured controls that fit nicely in our hands. When we were kids, when these things came out, we didn't care. It was a controller. So, in that way, the Nintendo controller hasn't aged well, but it was solid.
Yes, it was durable.
I could beat you to an inch of your life, and that controller would still have no problems. Also, good diagonals.
Yes, good diagonals. When I had an Atari 2600, and I used to browse through the pages of the Consumer Distributing Catalog, this is a real Canadian thing for listeners here.
Yep.
I used to see NES controllers, and I used to go, what the hell are those? I couldn't imagine a controller that wasn't a stick. And I got my hands on one, and I'm like, oh, it was really good. It was really good. Pad things where it's at. And it just became second nature. Yeah, nowadays, too small. But at the time, solid. And I think I'd rather use an NES controller now than, say, I don't know, a Wiimote turned on its side, which is still surprisingly decent for the games that support it.
See, I don't agree with you on that, because the Wiimote turned on its side, it basically is a NES controller, let's face it.
With the weird trigger on the left.
But it also, because it's rounded,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't bite into your hands. Now, maybe that's a thing for older gamers. They don't like that. Maybe the younger gamers, when we were that young, we overlooked it, A, because it was a freaking game console. We were playing video games, but look at the evolution there. NES to Super NES. NES, very rigid, very edgy. I could bludgeon you with it. Super NES, very contoured. There was not an edge on there. They were now looking beyond, they were looking to the aesthetic, but they were also making it so that it didn't hurt your hands.
We're forgetting one of the big players back in the console days. If you remember, the Master System also had a very rectangular controller.
It was a duplicate of the NES controller, though, in almost every way.
That's right. The Master System had a bit more power than the NES. As I recall, it was released after? Yes. Am I going to look like a fool for saying that?
I remember it being after.
But the Genesis was released before the Super Nintendo. The Genesis did the contoured controller thing first. There was no edge on that controller either.
There wasn't.
And that was a better Master System controller than the Master System controller. When I was playing on my friend's Master System, I never had one. We would always plug in his Genesis controllers. The A button wouldn't work, but B and C would map to 1 and 2, and it was a better controller than the Master System ones. And I take back what I said about worst controller. Sega Master System controller, worst controller ever. The worst D-pad in the world.
See, and that all depends what you're looking for, because if you think about it, how many games can you think of on the Master System that needed
How many games can you think of on the Master System?
Well, there you go.
Well, there's Phantasy Star 1.
Bonk.
Bonk was a TurboGrafx.
Oh, you're right.
TurboGrafx 16. Never owned one.
Adventure Island.
Adventure Island was an NES knockoff of Wonder Boy.
Sure.
For the Master System.
Still, it was there.
Brutally hard game, especially with that shitty controller. And then the Wonder Boys went off to be the Zelda 2-esque Doors and Treasures adventure, 2D side-scrolling platformer sword and shield thing, whereas Adventure Island, Master Higgins, they kept that same theme of traversing through the island, which led to the really good Adventure Island 2, the okay Adventure Island 3, the subpar Adventure Island 4. Okay, we're getting off controls. Master System controller, terrible. Back to that for a moment. Cloudmaster. You needed diagonals in that game. It was a brutally hard bullet shooter and it didn't have like the bullet hell Jamestown thing where you have a tiny hitbox. No, that guy and his whole cloud was a hitbox, and you had no good diagonals to deal with the monstrous number of projectiles Suzaku is throwing at you.
Yeah, see, at that point, I had an NES late. I was playing Commodore, so I was still back on the stick.
Yeah, I remember that. I had the NES, you had the Commodore. Then when you had an NES, you had those 50-in-1 cartridges, or wherever the hell you got those things.
115 from Japan.
Yeah, from Japan. With the weird versions of Mario and whatnot.
So then we had the Sega Genesis and the Super NES.
Yeah, the Genesis did the curved controller thing, which is Super Nintendo blatantly copied. And to its credit, it should copy that.
The Genesis, I thought, was a much better controller for games like sports. And even, well, it depends. Fighters, I thought, were still really good on the Sega Genesis.
They released that 6-button pad, though.
Not only because it was usually the unedited version. Nintendo was being a pussy back then.
Around the time of Mortal Kombat 2, they relaxed that, and Mortal Kombat 2 had a fully bloody version on the Super Nintendo.
But still, they wussed out on the original.
You know, it's funny, I think Street Fighter 2 Turbo still has blood on the Super Nintendo. And later Street Fighter 2 games shunned it. to the point that Yoshinoro Ono, I'm pretty sure I'm saying his name wrong, said they can't have a Mortal Kombat crossover because he doesn't want to see Ryu's heads get ripped off by Mortal Kombat
I'm pretty
characters.
sure today's gamers would actually like to see that.
But if you watch the terrible Street Fighter animes, those things are violent as shit!
Different department.
Different environment.
Yeah, we're definitely getting off topic.
Sorry, my fault. But
Yeah.
there were strengths. I never liked the 3-button on 1 row layout. The 6-button one solved that problem because I kind of had a row above it. But only certain games use that.
Yes.
I think that's why even today's controllers use the diamond formation that the Super Nintendo had.
Well, yeah, if we move on to the next version, we're going to skip the N64 because...
It still had that diamond. Those
It
yellow
still had
keys
the
were on the
diamond.
diamond, and it had 2 more on the face. In a way, that face arrangement was very smart. It's just those buttons were different sizes and weird. But playing Killer Instinct Gold on that thing was actually pretty good.
I'll take your word for it. Again,
It's a terrible fighter. But
my only way to play N64 games at the time was on a emulator that came out the same Christmas as Zelda did. So the same day that people were playing Zelda on their consoles, within like a week I was playing it on my Gravis controller.
with no music, I remember that.
I had music, but only if I started a new game. Because I had no save ability other than save state. But I got through the entire game on a Gravis controller with 8 buttons. Now, think of that and the N64 controller. That was a challenge, to say the least. But we move beyond that, we move into the PlayStation era.
Yeah.
Because, let's face it, N64 versus PlayStation, N64 might as well just bent over and taken it, because it sure did.
The thing about the PlayStations 1 and 2, and the Dualshocks 1 and 2, is that depending on the color and make and generation of controller, you would get one with either really awesome D-pad diagonals,
Yeah.
which made them ideal for fighters, or you'd find one with horrible diagonals.
Well, any of the colored transparent
The colored ones had terrible diagonals. The black and white ones, or off gray, I guess,
Yes.
seem to be the best ones. And racist time, the white ones seem to have the best diagonals of them all. I think the original PlayStation controllers without the 2 sticks were even better for that. They had really sharp diagonals on those.
Yeah.
It looks like it's 4 different buttons, but it's not. That pad is connected underneath that plastic.
Yes.
It was very, very strong.
I
for
had it
diagonals.
hard enough.
I played Symphony of the Night, doing Alucard's complicated special fighting game specials.
Yeah.
And they were no problem on an original PlayStation controller.
Even the PlayStation 2 had very strong diagonals. Again,
It depended on which controller.
keeping away from, we're not even going to talk about third-party ones on this. That would take forever.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure this is already hitting half an hour-ish.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, third-party controllers, I've never... Okay, actually, I can't say that. We're going to take a segue here into third-party controllers at the time. I'm going to go PC because I was a major PC gamer on this.
For PC, that's all you have.
Well, no, you see, you can't talk first-party too much because Logitech, Gravis, and Microsoft were your 3 developers of controllers that were, quote-unquote, trusted, good. So they were, let's call them the first-party ones.
But they're not the first party, though. That's the thing. They were all third party.
Okay, you're right.
PCs were clones.
They were.
There was no official
Yeah.
controller. And that's kind of what I want to see now. I hate that I can't plug an Xbox controller into a Wii and just map it like I could on PC.
Yeah,
I despise
that would be nice. Okay, fine. You're right. Third-party controllers. I had, and this was around the time of Final Fantasy VIII coming out.
Mm-hmm.
I only had the PC. I didn't have a PlayStation at the time. And I bought the 3DFX with Rumble support. 3DFX was a video card maker at the time. They also branched out a little bit into a couple other things, but here
I
I
remember
am.
that name now.
Here I am. I've got almost like a PlayStation controller in my hands. It's got Rumble. It's got all these features, and then I load up Final Fantasy VIII, which finally came out. No Rumble support at all.
The PC version by
PC.
IDOS, or IDOS published 7, and Square Enix directly published 8.
Correct.
Yes.
So pissed off, but the controller was strong. I would say it probably kicked the ass of any Gravis controller I've ever seen. And Gravis was pretty good at the time. though it always had that screw-in stick you could do on the pad.
Yeah,
So you could do a sort of a stick-like motion. Only problem is, that thing was manufactured poorly every time, and it always went snap. Especially if you really got physical and doing things like hockey. All of a sudden, left, right, snap! Fuck!
I snapped that thing off once, and I never used it again, because I had no way to get the screw out. And it was better to just use the damn pad anyway.
I kept on getting replacements for it, because I just jam a screwdriver down and unscrew it out of the system. But third-party controllers, let's face it, we've not found any third-party controllers that we can think of that were any good on consoles.
Well, you know what? I had a third-party NES controller, and it had rounded corners and a better D-pad and turbo functionality and a screw-in stick.
Okay.
A screw-in thumbstick of all things. The thumbstick sucked. I never used it. But it was a lot more comfortable than that controller. In fact, I think I found it the other day. I'll look through my
And
pile.
that wouldn't surprise me, because back in the early days of Nintendo, they supported third parties making lots of junk for their stuff.
They also made first-party junk controllers.
Wow.
Like the NES Max,
Wow.
and the NES
Yes.
Advantage Stick, and the NES Dance Pad,
and
the Power Glove.
Let's leave all that to the angry video game nerd, because he's done more than enough videos on just how shitty.
Did he do an NES Max video? He did a Power Glove one. Awesome video. If you're listening to this, James Rolfe, we're big fans, especially me.
I don't know if he has, but I'm sure he owns one. Let's face it, he owns pretty much everything.
Yeah, he has everything.
But and there's a mentality that really changed in Nintendo. They don't support the third parties as much as they used to. They still allow people to do it, but in that way, Nintendo is still the most open towards it. Sony isn't, and Microsoft definitely isn't.
And I hate that, because if they were, people could make custom sticks that wouldn't cost me $300, because I don't like Japanese stick and buttons and layouts. I like American layouts, American sticks. The buttons can be from either side of the pond, as long as they're the grid, non-curved layout. I know I'm going to get carpal tunnel one day playing those games that way, but fuck, I can't do that. And of course, it cost me $300 just to get a controller, a fight stick, because someone modded a Mad Catz pad into a box, because that's the only way to get around Microsoft's things. For PlayStation 3, there's like this Cthulhu board that it's just a box with screws. You stick in the wires for each button and you screw it in. Very simple to set up. I could do it, and I have no man skills. No soldering required. And Sony supports all that, and Microsoft doesn't. I hate it.
Because Microsoft can't profit from it. But we'll get to the idiosyncrasies of their ideas later. Modern consoles. So I've already said what I think about Kinect.
Yes.
Though I will give Kinect credit for the fact that it doesn't require a controller. It's a lot closer to. I admire the Kinect more for what other people have hacked it to do. Everything from 3D modeling to the potential is there. If they kept the original design with its own processor, maybe it would do something special. But I tried to play, and I'm embarrassing myself here, but I could not bowl using the Kinect. Because I would do an actual bowling motion, and because I'm a big guy, it would not register.
It's like, what is this planetoid flinging its asteroid belt of an arm?
I actually hit the crowd more than I hit the pins. I'll give them credit for the highlight reel they do to that game, but they caught me doing some pretty funny shit. But motion controls, get rid of them. Well, honestly, and the worst one is not the Wii. It's the Sony Move.
Okay, I need to ramble about motion controls for a bit. Here's the thing. Mario Galaxy 1, Mario Galaxy 2, and that WarioWare that used the Wiimote, those are Wii Remote, whatever the official term is. Hopefully we don't get sued for saying Remote.
Hereby known as, on this show, as the Wiimote. Fuck you guys, you can't trademark the name and tell us we can't call it a Wiimote.
Well, actually, I think they can, but let's hope none of the people are listening.
I don't think copyright does.
Who's listening to this? Who's listening to
Good
this?
point.
Really? So, here's the thing. Mario Galaxy 2, and the WarioWare game, those are the only games I ever felt like, I really think these games are made for these motion controls, and they feel good. Every other game I've played that's forced it, I thought could have had a scheme that didn't involve it.
Though you still have not tried Wind Waker, I don't think. Or not Wind Waker.
The
newest one,
Skyward Sword, and I don't care to. Zelda's done for me. I like the old 2D ones and Wind Waker. Those are the Zeldas I like. I still have to try Darksiders. I have it on Steam. I hear good things. I will one day get around to it.
He buys somebody that doesn't plan. He still hasn't finished Batman Arkham City.
Arkham Asylum. I didn't even start Arkham City yet.
Sorry, I gave you more credit than you deserved. But, motion controls.
Hang on. I'm still talking about my rant. So I got to rant for a little bit. Every other game, I felt like, man, this is shitty, and I think they should have offered a different control scheme. Why are they trying to push this agenda? Wouldn't they get more people on board if they gave you the option? I hate Smash Brothers Brawl with a passion because of the nonsense it introduced to gaming that people love. But one thing it did right, you could pick how you wanted to play the game.
So did Mario Kart.
GameCube controller, classic controller, Wiimote on the side, Wiimote and nunchuck. Do you want up to jump? Yes, no? Good lord! That game, for all the problems it has, and it has a ton of problems and deserves not even a fraction of its praise, that wasn't one of them. It gave you the ability to control the game the way you wanted. In Chrono Trigger DS, you could pick an entire stylus control scheme, or you could pick a pad and button scheme. Or you could mix and match the two as you saw fit, moving with the pad and hitting with the stylus. In Sonic Rush on the DS, you controlled most of the game with pad and buttons, and the special stages were with the stylus. When you entered one, it gave you time to get the stylus out, told you to tap when you were ready, you played it with the stylus, then you put it away and played with pad. Those are games that use it pretty well, but most of them just force it on you, and don't give you the choice, or don't do it in some interesting way where you kind of want to use both, or just the one scheme. And that's what I hate about motion controls. It's a gimmick. They make these games around this gimmick, and the games aren't strong games in their own right. New Super Mario Bros. Wii's level design is terrible. Fundamentally shitty level design compared to any old Mario game. And they still force you to shake and wobble and whatnot, making it even more frustrating, not even touching the multiplayer. That's my ramble. Please go on.
I don't quite agree about a bunch of it. I don't like motion controls. I'll say it right out of the pack. I do think that the PlayStation Move is the worst version of the current motion control scheme. I mean, it's horrible.
I don't see how it's any different from a Wiimote. Other than Sony did it other than it's way overpriced.
And a blatant ripoff.
And Sony totally did it to cash in on a craze. At least Microsoft introduced a cool little piece of tech. That's what that's what our current Old Republic leveling buddy says about the Kinect. It's a cool piece of tech.
It is.
That's about it.
Potential is there. I think the Sony Move was done just as a cash in to try and go along with it. It is a Wii ripoff. I don't care what anybody says. Feel free to, if you're actually listening to this, to nail me on the comments on that and back it up. I have all three systems. I'm not a fanboy of anything. I go where the games are, and that's it. But I think Microsoft did it right. I think Nintendo, with the games that use it right, are doing a fine job. I love the Skyward Sword setup with it, where I just love how it responds to the remote. I think this is the first time they've actually gotten sword combat right. But
that's something we'll have to disagree on, because I would rather just do it with buttons.
And I don't think that's possible, but argument for another time. Shut up.
Motion controls.
So, my rant on motion controls on that sort of ends. That's my idea on them. I think that the next generation is going to largely abandon motion controls, as we're already seeing what Nintendo's doing with its next system.
Yeah, the Wii U.
The Wii U seems to be getting rid of it and going to more of a DS-style control system, which I think is going to be a much better system.
It does kind of feel like a DS for TV.
It's using the idea of a Apple iPad control to your... It's a giant DS control and it's an iPad in the middle.
Yeah, basically. I like that better than waggling my hand to do shit. I think that I would not be. I have a Wii. I kind of don't have it anymore. I gave it away, and I haven't missed it a single day. I haven't had it. If I'm not poor by the time the Wii U comes out and the games are there, I think I might not be ashamed to own one, because it seems like this is a better platform for the innovative kind of gaming. See, the DS was onto something with the two screens. It seemed like a big gimmick, but other than the games that forced stylus use where it wasn't necessary, the DS was pretty successful, and the games, they worked pretty well on the two screens. For the most part, Yoshi's Island DS notwithstanding, because there's that dead area in the middle.
Yeah,
you couldn't see obstacles.
Individual games we can get into another time.
Mm-hmm.
But motion controls, I think, have come and gone. I know Microsoft intends to for the 720, as everybody is calling it. They want to have a Kinect 2, and I think that's a good idea for Microsoft. They've got the better piece of tech going forward, and it's going to be a lot more useful for things beyond just gaming. There's potential there for PC applications. Now they're going to finally support it. But as far as the control scheme goes, it is time to get rid of the motion controls. Let's go back to a hunk of plastic in our hands, and let's move on to good controls, which sort of leads us back now. We've gone through the Wii.
I want to touch the motion control one more thing. The motion control thing one more time. I have no issue with games that use it really well, Mario Galaxy, and I have no issue with games that have it as an option along with other options. I think there is room for motion controls, and Nintendo has been too financially successful with it for it to go away. I just think that it can't be forced upon you by Daddy Nintendo, because you don't know what you want, Mr. Consumer. Nintendo knows. You play the game, but continue. We can move on now.
Moving on to the PlayStation, I've talked about Move.
Xbox.
Well, no. Let's stay with the DualShock 3 for a minute.
Mm-hmm. DualShock 3 is kind of bad.
I don't like it.
The pad
The
is...
DualShock 3, the pad's fine.
I don't like the pad. The pad is rigid and the diagonals are horrible. I have 3 DualShock 3s, and none of them feel good in my hands.
And yet I find it a hell of a lot better than even the new Xbox made for a fighting game pad.
I would rather, because I have Mega Man 10 on all 3 consoles, because I'm an idiot. And
I'm not arguing that.
I feel more comfortable playing Mega Man 10, a precision jumping platformer game, with an Xbox analog pad. And this is including playing his bass with his complicated dashing, jumping, fast-paced control scheme,
Okay.
than I do playing it on a PS3 D-pad. It feels a lot more comfortable on my fingers than pressing down, and the diagonals feel bad, especially with bass, who has to shoot diagonally.
Okay.
And I've tried using the analog stick on the PS3, but it's not positioned quite right, because in a stroke of brilliance, the Xbox 360 controller kind of swapped those positions and put the stick where the pad would be, which feels a lot more comfortable. Drawback, D-pad kind of blows and is in a crappy position even on the new awesome D-pad controller. I basically adjusted to that by just playing those kinds of games on the analog stick.
Fair enough. I do think that the Xbox has the superior pad for things like shooters.
You mean the analog stick at this point, right?
I'm talking the controller in general.
The D-pad?
No, I'm just talking the Xbox control in general. Where the analog sticks are, where the D-pad is, I find that much better for a shooter than I do on a PS3 DualShock 3.
When you say shooter, you mean corridor, first-person shooter?
First person.
Or Jamestown-esque shooter?
No, first person, actual shooter.
Okay.
However, that being said, I find I like the PS3 controller more for things like Uncharted, which granted non-both systems, but go with, I can't even go with the Darkness because that was a PlayStation or Xbox exclusive. What was the shooter on both? Red Dead Redemption. That's not fair. That's a shooter. The Uncharted style games, Darksiders. I find those are better on an actual DualShock 3.
don't you hate the triggers on those things? What? That's a leading question. That's a terrible question. Let me rephrase that as a non-logical fallacy leading question. What do you think of the triggers on the DualShock 3?
They're fine, but they're not as good as their PS2.
I despise the triggers on the PS3. First of all, I liked having digital L2, R2 buttons on the DualShock 2 and the DualShock 1, and for that matter. And the original PlayStation controller, for that matter. They made them analog, which means that since I don't have an arcade stick on the PS3 to use them in fighting games, roundhouse kick is now on an analog nub with a slope, which makes my finger slip off it. At least the 360 triggers, and even the N64 trigger kind of catch your finger. Whereas the DualShock 3 triggers are sloped down away so that your finger falls off them. In fact, as I recall, the trigger button for most shooters on PS3 is R1. Is that correct? Which is much more reliable
and that's why it was done that way. So I can agree with you that there should be a slope up to sort of catch your finger. Mm-hmm. But upcoming game SSX for all the systems. Mm-hmm. I actually pre-ordered it on the PlayStation 3 because trying to play any of the old SSX games on the Xbox controller was just wrong. Mm-hmm. Number one, no control customization, but everything was everywhere, and I found myself messing around. Whereas, as much as I hate how light and small the DualShock 3 is, it's all right there.
I don't have much SSX experience, not my thing, so I can't comment too much.
I can't blame the control too much on that. That is a problem of EA and not allowing you to reassign your buttons.
And that's something we need to talk about when it comes to controls.
Next time.
Actually, let's cap off this one with that. Why the hell are we in 2012 and not every game, and we have games that still don't let you remap your buttons? Are you kidding me, game developers? I could do this on Doom 1 on PC. Why can't we remap buttons? So many games don't allow this. It's ludicrous. Why? Why?
I've got to agree with you on this, so it's going to be a little bit of a one-sided argument, but
we're signing off our pilot episode of this? Signing off! Because I need that. Would you like a shot of this?
No, I do not need a shot of you putting deodorant on top of your shirt.
What the hell's wrong with
and
that?
Pants.
I don't understand what's so bizarre about that.
You're fucking weird.
I'm not the only person who puts deodorant on the clothing. I might be the only person who puts it on the groin, but I get a stinky groin, David.
This commercial from Old Spice.
Old Spice. Have you seen the Tide Old Spice commercial?
Of course.
I love how he's on a jet ski.
Why not?
Old Spice body spray! He's just yelling. That woman's so scary. Okay, we've delayed long. Game controllers. Is it recording?
Damn right.
Oh, Jesus Christ. We've been recording this entire goddamn time.
Damn right.
Well.
Outtake number 1.
Yes, outtakes. Yeah, I put deodorant on my clothes and my crotch, because I got a smelly crotch.
I think the audience is heard by now.
Yeah, probably. Are you broadcasting this? Should I know?
That would be amusing.
That would be amusing.
A lot.
All right.